A single glowing leaf appeared on a quiet herbalist's windowsill. Elara lived a life of simple routines, surrounded by the drying herbs and familiar scents of her small cottage. This leaf was unlike any she had ever seen, pulsing with a soft, silver light that seemed to breathe. It was an invitation, a silent call from the legendary Moonlit Groves, a place whispered to hold profound peace and ancient secrets known to very few. To follow its gentle glow meant leaving behind everything she knew, stepping away from a safe and predictable life into the deep, unknown shadows of the forest. By the end of her journey, you will understand how to find a deep and lasting calm by embracing your own gentle curiosity. What mysteries would she uncover in that moonlit world, and what part of herself would she have to risk to find them? What quiet call are you waiting to answer in your own life? Elara's hand trembled only slightly as she placed a sprig of dried lavender and a smooth, warm river stone into her leather satchel. These were not tools of magic, but simple anchors to the world she knew. Then she stepped across her cottage threshold. The worn wooden plank that marked her doorway felt like a border between two different lives. Behind her was the safety of routine, the familiar scent of drying chamomile, and the quiet hum of her village settling for the evening. Ahead, the forest path was a ribbon of deepening shadow, its entrance both intimidating and impossibly alluring. Every instinct for caution, built over years of a quiet and predictable existence, screamed at her to turn back, to latch the door and dismiss the glowing leaf as a trick of the light. But a quieter, more persistent feeling, that gentle curiosity, pulled at her with the force of a slow, deep tide. She chose to trust the initial comfort the leaf had offered, a warmth that had felt like a quiet greeting. Taking a slow breath, she committed to the path, her simple act of stepping forward revealing a latent bravery she hadn't known she possessed. With each step, the distant, comforting sounds of chiming goat bells and a neighbor's laughter began to fade, swallowed by the immense silence of the ancient woods. Soon, the only sounds were the soft crunch of her own footsteps and the deep, unknowable rustling of the trees around her, a reminder of the vast and mysterious world she was now entering. The path ahead seemed to shimmer then, as if dusted with starlight, and it beckoned her toward a soft, melodic sound drifting on the breeze. The path beneath her feet was no longer simple earth and stone. It was a soft ribbon of moss, flanked on either side by clusters of mushrooms that glowed with the same silver luminescence as the leaf that had called her here. Their light was not harsh, but a gentle, breathing radiance that pushed back the deep shadows of the towering trees. Elara slowed her steps, her own breath catching at the quiet beauty of it. She knelt, her leather satchel brushing the moss, and with a hesitant finger, she reached out to gently touch the cap of the nearest mushroom. It was cool and surprisingly smooth. At her touch, the soft silver light within it pulsed, warming to a brighter, friendlier gold. That single pulse did not fade. Instead, it traveled, a wave of shimmering gold that raced from one mushroom to the next, flowing down the path ahead of her like a chain of kindled stars. The forest was answering her, and the simple act of her gentle curiosity was literally lighting the way forward. But from the deeper darkness between the ancient trunks, a discordant rustle answered the light. It was a dry, skittering sound, entirely different from the soft, living noises of the path. It was the sound of something unseen, something that watched from a place the glowing mushrooms did not reach. A cold thread of fear tightened in her chest, a primal warning to flee. Her hand instinctively went to the smooth river stone in her satchel, its familiar solidity, a tether to a world that made sense. To run would be to stumble back into the dark, to lose the path and the calm it offered. So instead of panic, she made a choice. She drew a slow, steadying breath and began to hum a simple, calming tune, a lullaby her grandmother had sung to her during childhood storms. The melody was soft and old, woven from memory and comfort. She hummed it for herself, to quiet the drumming of her own heart, but the notes seemed to spill from her lips and into the very air of the grove. The discordant rustling quieted, fading back into the general murmur of the night. It was as if the forest itself had been holding its breath, and her offering of a gentle sound had given it permission to exhale. The personal stake in her journey became terrifyingly clear in that moment. Losing her inner calm was not just an emotional setback. Here, in this reactive and magical place, it meant losing her way entirely, both on the physical path and within her own spirit. The illuminated way forward was not just a trail to follow, but a state of being she had to actively maintain. Her humming seemed to settle the very light around her, and the path, now glowing more steadily, curved gently, leading her toward the soothing sound of a gentle, bubbling stream. The gentle murmur of the stream grew clearer until Elara found its bank, a ribbon of polished stones cradling water, so clear it seemed not to hold light, but to be made of it. Kneeling on the soft, damp earth, she saw her own face looking back from the still surface, her eyes wide and touched with the lingering shadow of her earlier fear. The water itself seemed to invite her, its cool sweetness a tangible promise on the air. She cupped her hands, dipped them into the current, and drank. The water was not merely cool, it was a shock of pure clarity, washing through her mind like a sudden, cleansing breeze. For a single, perfect moment, she was a child again, sitting in her grandmother's sun-drenched garden, the scent of warm soil and basil thick in the air, a feeling of absolute safety wrapped around her like a favorite blanket. That memory, long tucked away, filled her with a renewed strength, a deep and quiet resolve. But as the water stilled in her hands, her reflection rippled and the image shifted. For a heartbeat, she saw not the grove, but the interior of her own quiet cottage, empty and waiting. The familiar chair by the cold hearth, the neatly stacked jars of herbs. It was a vision of safety, of a life without risk or mystery. A sharp tug of longing pulled at her heart, a desperate whisper to return to what she knew. The conflict was no longer against a skittering sound in the dark, but a war waged silently within her own soul. Could she truly leave that solid, predictable world behind for the whispers of a magical grove? With a slow exhalation, Elara made her choice. She leaned forward and offered a soft, sincere whisper to the stream. Thank you for the memory and for the clarity. It was not a grand gesture, but a simple acknowledgement of the gift she had been given. In that moment, she understood that turning back now would be a deeper loss than merely abandoning a path. It would be a rejection of the comfort and ancient wisdom the grove was so gently offering her, a refusal of the person she was becoming. Refreshed in spirit, her gaze lifted from the water, and she noticed the stream's opposite bank was dotted with delicate, bell-shaped flowers, each one holding a soft, silver light that pulsed in a slow, familiar rhythm. The stream was wider than it had first appeared, its gentle murmur now a soft barrier between her and the path that continued on the far bank. For a moment, Elara simply stood there, the cool clarity of the water still fresh in her mind, and considered her options. The polished stones offered no safe crossing. Then her eyes, adjusting to the intricate play of silver light and deep shadow, found it. A span of thick, living vines, woven together by time and some unseen design, arched gracefully over the water. It was a bridge, but one that looked more like a part of the forest than a structure built by any hand she knew. It seemed both ancient and alive, a test of faith disguised as a path forward. Her initial confidence wavered. Could those slender, leafy strands truly hold her? Every instinct for self-preservation urged her to find another way, to backtrack or wander the bank in search of something more solid. But there was no other way. The glowing flowers on the opposite side pulsed softly, a silent, patient encouragement. She had to trust the grove or turn back now. Sliding the leather satchel more securely over her shoulder, she approached the vine-woven arch. She reached out, her fingers brushing the coarse, cool surface of the main vine. It felt sturdy, deeply rooted. Placing one foot carefully on the lowest part of the weave, she tested her weight. The bridge held firm and steady. A small surge of relief warmed her. But as she shifted her full weight onto the bridge and began to move, hand over hand, the living structure responded. It was not rigid like wood or stone. It gave slightly, a gentle, unsettling sway that mirrored the rhythm of the forest's own breath. With each deliberate step, the vines creaked softly, and she could feel them shift and tighten under her palms. This was not a static path, but a responsive one. A single hurried move, a moment of panicked clutching, could easily upset the delicate balance. The cool water below, which had seemed so refreshing moments before, now looked hard and unyielding. A fall from this height would mean more than a cold shock. It would mean injury, an end to her journey before it had truly begun. The stakes were no longer just emotional or spiritual. They were starkly, physically real. Her breath wanted to come in sharp gasps, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she remembered the lesson of the rustling darkness. Panic was the true enemy here, not the height or the shifting vines. She forced her breathing to slow, matching its rhythm to the slow, deliberate movements of her body. She did not rush. She focused only on the next handhold, the next secure placement for her foot, her entire world narrowing to this single, purposeful action. This was her choice, to prioritize steady progress over the frantic urge to simply reach the other side. With each careful movement, her trust in the grove's support, and more importantly, in her own capable body, grew stronger. The slight sway of the bridge was no longer a threat, but a reminder that she was moving in harmony with a living world. Finally, her boot touched the solid, mossy earth of the far bank. A wave of quiet triumph washed over her, so profound it felt like a new kind of warmth blooming in her chest. She had not just crossed a stream, she had navigated her own fear with mindful determination. On the other side, the air grew warmer and carried the rich, intoxicating scent of blooming night flowers. The rich scent of night flowers deepened as the path opened into a small, circular glade. Here, the air itself seemed to shimmer, alive with the dance of thousands of fireflies. They moved not at random, but in intricate, swirling patterns, weaving silent ribbons of gold and silver light against the velvet darkness. The sheer complexity of their movements was almost overwhelming, a beautiful, silent symphony that her mind desperately wanted to decode. What did these patterns mean? Were they a language, a map, a story she was meant to understand? A familiar pressure began to build behind her eyes, the intellectual tension of a puzzle she felt obligated to solve. She stood at the edge, her mind racing, trying to trace the logic in their luminous paths, and for a moment, the beauty of it all was eclipsed by her own frantic need to find its purpose. Then she remembered the vine bridge, the lesson of patient, deliberate movement. The grove was not testing her intellect, but her spirit. With a conscious release of that mental strain, she lowered herself to the soft moss, letting her satchel rest beside her. She would not try to decipher the dance. She would simply witness it. She allowed her breathing to slow, her gaze to soften, and as she did, the frantic need to understand simply melted away, replaced by a quiet, receptive wonder. In this state of patient acceptance, a single firefly broke from its swirling cohort. It drifted toward her, a tiny, pulsating star, and landed with impossible delicacy on the tip of her outstretched finger. Its light was cool and gentle against her skin. As she watched, mesmerized, she realized its soft pulses were no longer random. They were beating in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the quiet thump of her own heart. A profound sense of connection washed through her, a silent acknowledgement from the grove itself. She was in harmony with this place. Her calm was not just a feeling, but a state of being that the very light around her could recognize and mirror. The stakes in this glade were subtle, but immense. Had she given in to the pressure to intellectually conquer the beautiful patterns, she would have proven herself unready, closed off to the grove's more profound gifts by her own need for answers. Her decision to simply sit and observe was an act of deep trust, and the grove had answered in kind. As she sat in this tranquil communion, the fireflies around her began to shift their dance. Their swirling patterns softened, and they started to drift, as one, toward a single, immense tree at the very center of the glade, its ancient trunk thick with a cloak of glowing moss. The immense willow at the glade's center was a living sculpture of time and grace, its trunk a tapestry of gnarled bark and soft, glowing moss. Drawn by a force as gentle as it was undeniable, Elara approached. The air around the tree was still and warm, humming with a quiet energy she could feel in her bones. She raised her hand, her fingers hovering for a moment before she pressed her palm flat against the ancient bark. A deep, resonant hum traveled up her arm, a vibration of such profound and ancient life that it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. It was the heartbeat of the grove itself, patient and immense. In response to her touch, the tree stirred. A curtain of long, pliant vines, which had hung still as tapestry threads, began to lower with a soft, rustling sigh. They parted like a living veil, revealing a hollow space within the great trunk, a sheltered nook that seemed to breathe out a wave of cooler, fragrant air. Nestled within was a single, smooth stone, no larger than a bird's egg, glowing with a warm, amber light from deep within its core. Her breath caught. The urge to reach for it was immediate, a magnetic pull, but her hand froze halfway. To take something from this sacred, living sanctuary felt like an act of trespass. This was not a trinket left on a path. It was a part of the tree itself. A sharp conflict tore at her. Was her curiosity just a form of greed, a desire to possess a piece of the magic she had found? Or was the stone's placement, its very revelation, an intentional offering? She looked from the glowing stone back to the textured bark under her palm, feeling the steady, humming life there. The grove had not led her here to tease or punish her. It had guided her, tested her, and comforted her. This felt like the next step. With a slow, deliberate breath, she made her choice. She would not take, she would accept. Her fingers closed around the stone. It was wonderfully warm, like a sun-washed pebble, and it fit perfectly in the cup of her hand. In that moment, the hum from the tree seemed to soften into something that felt like approval. The stakes of her journey shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just a visitor admiring the scenery. She was a participant, someone the grove had deemed worthy of a task, a purpose. The stone grew warmer in her grasp, and its inner light pulsed once, then again, with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if answering a silent call. A new, narrower path she had not noticed before began to glow faintly uphill, its entrance marked by two leaning stones, covered in the same luminous moss. The gentle light from the stone in her hand seemed to pull her forward, toward the rising ground, and whatever awaited her above. The path slanted sharply upward, a steady climb that demanded every ounce of her focus. Elara's hands found purchase on gnarled roots and cool, moss-slicked stone, her muscles burning with a clean, honest strain. Each deliberate pull upward, each careful placement of her boot, anchored her firmly in the reality of her own body. There was no room for the whispers of doubt here, no space for the haunting image of her quiet, empty cottage. Her world narrowed to the next handhold, the next breath drawn deep into her lungs. This was not a punishment, but a purification. The grove was asking for her commitment, not in thought, but in action, and with every straining step, she was answering. The slope was treacherous in places, the soil loose and shifting beneath her weight, threatening to send her sliding back down, but she did not stop. She allowed herself only brief pauses, standing braced against the hillside, her chest heaving as she drank in the cool night air. These were moments for breath, not for second thoughts. Pushing onward was a conscious decision, a repeated act of will that was forging a new kind of strength within her, a resilience that was both physical and spiritual. The air grew thinner, cooler as she ascended. Each foot of elevation gained feeling like a measurable distance, traveled away from the life she had known and toward the mysterious heart of this magical place. The stakes felt higher here, the mission more vital, as if the grove itself was waiting to see if she had the endurance to reach its center. Then, with one final, taxing pull, the ground leveled out beneath her feet. She had reached the crest, her body humming with fatigue and triumph, but the view that greeted her was not a panoramic summit. It was an entrance, a grand archway formed by two ancient, intertwining trees, their branches creating a canopy that opened onto a vast, breathtaking clearing bathed in the pure, undiluted light of the full moon. The immense clearing was a bowl of liquid moonlight, its silence so profound it seemed to absorb the very sound of her breathing. At its center lay a pool of such perfect stillness, it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the star-dusted sky began. Elara walked forward, her footsteps hushed by the thick, velvety moss, drawn toward that flawless reflection of the full moon. With each step she took, the grove responded. Delicate, night-blooming flowers unfurled their petals along the water's edge, a silent, instantaneous eruption of color and life that marked her passage. They were acknowledging her, welcoming her to this sacred heart. But as she reached the pool's rim, that welcoming energy shifted into a deep, waiting silence. It was a palpable pressure, a collective breath held by the ancient trees and the glowing flora, all watching, all waiting for her next move. The culmination of her entire journey rested on this single moment. What was she meant to do? Her hand closed around the warm, amber stone in her pocket. It was not hers to keep, not here. With a slow, deliberate motion, she knelt and placed the glowing stone gently on the moss at the very edge of the still water. It was an act of offering of trust, a silent declaration that she was ready to receive whatever truth the grove had shown her. The profound silence held for one more heartbeat. Then, without a whisper of wind, the surface of the pool began to ripple. The ripples on the pool's surface did not spread outward, but instead coalesced, drawing the moonlight into a single, shimmering image. Elara leaned forward, her breath catching. She did not see her own face looking back. Instead, the water showed her a memory, clear and vivid as the day had happened. She saw her own hands, caked with garden soil, gently cupping the drooping stem of a lavender plant that had wilted under a harsh sun. She remembered the feeling of the warm earth, the faint, desperate scent of the stressed plant, and the simple, unthinking compassion that had moved her to carefully tend to it, offering water and a soft, encouraging word. It was a small act, one she had performed without a single thought of reward or recognition, an expression of her most innate self. The vision in the water held this moment, presenting it not as a forgotten memory, but as a sacred truth. The invitation to the Moonlit Groves had not been a random chance or a test of her bravery alone. It had been an answer. Her consistent, quiet kindness, her nurturing spirit, was the very beacon the grove had seen and answered with its glowing leaf. Her entire life of gentle care, which she had sometimes viewed as simple and unremarkable, was being validated as a profound and powerful force. A wave of emotion, raw and overwhelming, washed over her. How could something so small, so ordinary, warrant such a majestic response? The conflict was immediate and internal, a struggle between a lifelong feeling of being unworthy of grand recognition and the undeniable proof shimmering in the water. To accept this was to accept that her quiet nature was not a limitation, but a key. With a soft, grateful sigh that seemed to release a weight she had carried for years, Elara let the truth settle deep within her. She did not feel pride, nor the hot burn of shame for her past doubts. She simply felt seen, truly and completely, for the very first time. This acceptance carried with it a final, immense escalation of her journey's stakes. Recognizing her own worth was not the end, but a new beginning. It meant fully embracing the responsibility that came with such a connection to this ancient, sentient place. It was a promise to continue living from that place of gentle intention, not just within the grove, but in the world she would return to. As the vision in the water gently faded, its silver light dissolving back into the pool's dark mirror, a new form began to take shape on the far side of the water. It was a figure woven from dappled moonlight and the deepest forest shadow, waiting silently for her. The figure of moonlight and shadow gestured, a slow, fluid motion that was less a command and more an invitation. Elara rose, her movements calm and deliberate, meeting the gaze of the ancient being she understood, without words, to be the keeper of this sacred place. In that simple act of standing before it, the grove transformed around her. It was no longer just a beautiful, magical location. It was a companion, a sentient presence that had watched her journey, tested her resolve, and now welcomed her with a profound, wordless benevolence. The keeper did not speak. No sound came from its shimmering form. Instead, a cascade of images bloomed directly in her mind, vivid and fleeting. She saw a towering mountain, enduring endless storms, a deep river carving its path through stone over millennia, a single seed splitting open in the dark soil. These were not just pictures, they were feelings, impressions of immense patience, quiet strength, and inevitable growth. The challenge was immediate and immense. How was she to interpret this silent language? Her own mind, her human need for clear instructions and linear answers, threatened to rise up and shout over these gentle impressions. She could feel the tension of potential misunderstanding, a chasm that could render her entire journey meaningless. If she failed to grasp what the keeper was offering, the wisdom of the grove would remain locked away, a gift she was unable to receive. The stakes of her communion were absolute, so she made a choice. Drawing upon every lesson the path had taught her, Elara consciously stilled the internal chatter of her own thoughts. She let go of the need to analyze, to label, to find the one true meaning. She opened her mind, not as a student ready to take notes, but as a quiet vessel, ready to be filled. It was an act of profound trust, a surrender not of her will, but of her need to control the experience. In that state of deep receptivity, the keeper's communication shifted. The flowing images softened, focusing into a single, clear feeling that settled in her heart like a warm, heavy stone. It was a sense of deep, abiding belonging, a recognition that her own gentle nature was not separate from the enduring patience of the mountain or the determined flow of the river, but a part of the same timeless pattern. Then the keeper gestured again, one luminous hand extending toward the offering stone she had placed by the water's edge. The amber stone now glowed with an intense, steady light, as if it had absorbed the very essence of the moon above. The keeper's luminous hand did not touch the stone, but guided Elara's own to hover just above its warm, glowing surface. As her fingers neared, the amber stone trembled, then lifted from the moss of its own accord, hanging suspended in the air between them. A soft, crystalline sound filled the clearing, and the single stone pulsed with a brilliant, pure light before cleanly dividing into two perfect, identical halves. They glowed with the same gentle warmth, two parts of a newly formed whole. One drifted toward the keeper, dissolving into its form of moonlight and shadow, while the other settled gently into Elara's waiting palm. This was not a gift to be kept, but a covenant made physical, a tangible symbol of a guardianship now shared between her world and this one. A cold spike of fear pierced her moment of awe. The weight of the small stone in her hand felt immense, a heavy promise that stretched into a future she could not see. Was her quiet life, her simple kindness, truly enough to bear such a responsibility? The grove had seen something in her, but did she see it in herself? This internal conflict was a final, crucial test, one she had to pass alone. Her eyes met the silent, patient gaze of the keeper, and in that stillness, she found her answer. Her fingers closed around her half of the stone with a confident, decisive grip. This was not an obligation forced upon her, but a role she actively chose to accept. She was now a guardian, a bridge between the mundane and the magical, tasked with carrying the grove's calm back into the human world and protecting its ancient, quiet magic. The stakes of her journey transformed in that single, deliberate action. This was no temporary adventure. The pact was eternal, a lifetime of gentle stewardship that would require her to live with intention every day, to see the world with the same wonder and patience she had found on the path. With the covenant sealed, the keeper's form began to soften, its light blending back into the dappled patterns of the moonlit clearing. One final, graceful gesture pointed not forward, but back the way she had come. The path home was now visible, shimmering with a soft, familiar light, waiting to guide her first steps into her new life. The whispering path now seemed to greet her by name as she passed. Elara turned from the heart of the grove and began her walk back, her steps sure and steady on the familiar moss, but the journey was not a simple reversal. The silver-lit mushrooms along the path did not merely glow, they pulsed with a soft, synchronized light as she approached, a silent, rhythmic welcome. The ancient willow tree, now visible in the distance, seemed to dip a branch in quiet acknowledgement. She was not retracing her steps. She was walking through a world that now knew her, a place where she belonged. The air itself felt different, warmer, and more supportive, as if the grove was embracing her on her way home. Yet, with every familiar landmark that shone with this new significance, a small, cold whisper of doubt uncoiled in the back of her mind. This was all so perfect, so magical. What if it was only real here, within these enchanted borders? What if the moment she stepped back across her own cottage threshold, the profound peace she felt would evaporate like morning mist, leaving only the memory of a beautiful dream? The fear was not of the grove, but of losing it, of returning to her old life, unchanged, and watching this hard-won serenity fade into a wistful story. Her fingers tightened around the smooth, warm stone in her palm, its constant physical warmth a silent argument against that creeping fear. This was no dream. This was a covenant, and the stone was her proof. She made a conscious decision to anchor her faith in its tangible reality, to trust that the connection she felt was not bound by geography, but was woven into the very fabric of her spirit now. The true test, she understood with a quiet thrill of apprehension, was not the journey here, but the journey that would continue long after she left. Could she carry this moonlit calm into the sunlit world of her village, into her daily routines and simple chores? The preservation of everything she had found, the entire purpose of her guardianship, hinged on this single, ongoing act of integration. The path ahead curved gently, the forest thinning until she could see the first hints of the approaching dawn, a soft, gray light promising the familiar world that lay just beyond the trees. The vine bridge appeared before her, its familiar arch a final, silent threshold. Elara did not pause at its edge. Her hand met the coarse, living vine, and her foot found its first hold in a single, fluid motion. There was no hesitation, no testing of her weight. The bridge, which had once felt like a precarious challenge, now felt like a partner in her journey, its gentle sway a comforting rhythm, rather than a threat. Her steps were sure and confident, each movement a testament to the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. Below, the stream seemed to roar with a new intensity, its waters churning as if to remind her of the risk, to test the solidity of her newfound calm. It was a final, whispered question from the grove itself. Was her peace deep enough to withstand the noise of the world she was returning to? Elara made a conscious choice. She kept her gaze fixed on the path that awaited her on the far bank, her focus locked on the future, not the chasm below. This simple act was a powerful declaration. She was not leaving the grove behind. She was carrying it with her, and to look down into the roaring water would be to doubt that essential truth. The successful crossing of this bridge was more than a physical return. It was the crucial first step in weaving the grove's magic into the fabric of her everyday life. If she could not carry this calm across the stream, the entire journey would remain a beautiful, isolated memory, its power trapped within the moonlit trees. As her boots touched the soft moss of the opposite shore, she turned for a final moment toward the stream of reflections. The water, now calm and clear, showed her a face she barely recognized, her eyes holding a deep, unshakable serenity, a gentle smile touching her lips. The path curved, leading Elara back into the glade of fireflies. This time, the air did not hum with a complex, silent symphony waiting to be decoded, but with a gentle, welcoming warmth, as if the clearing itself had been awaiting her return. She paused at its edge, taking in the familiar, swirling patterns of light. Then, on an impulse she did not question, she raised her hand, opening her palm to reveal the warm, amber stone. The reaction was instantaneous. The intricate dance above shattered into 1,000 points of excited light. The entire swarm descended, not in a chaotic cloud, but in a single, joyful river of gold and silver, swirling around her uplifted hand in a breathtaking vortex of light. They did not touch the stone, but danced with it, their individual lights pulsing in perfect, celebratory harmony with its gentle glow. This was not a test or a lesson, but a farewell party thrown just for her. The connection was alive, a vibrant thread of mutual affection that thrummed between her spirit and the grove. A sharp, unexpected pang of sadness pierced through her wonder. The sheer beauty of this moment was a painful reminder of what she was about to leave behind. The conflict was no longer about fear or worthiness, but about the simple, human ache of parting from a place that felt more like home than any building ever had. This bittersweet feeling deepened the significance of her departure, proving that her attachment was genuine, born of love, not just awe. Her fingers closed gently around the stone, and she brought her hand to her chest, holding it over her heart. Looking out at the swirling, luminous beings, she whispered a promise into the warm air. "I will come back to you." This was not a heroic vow or a solemn duty, but a quiet assurance spoken to a friend. She was not closing a chapter, but promising to visit again, cementing an ongoing relationship that would transcend the boundary between her two worlds. The emotional stake of her entire journey crystallized in that whisper. It was the promise to nurture this impossible friendship, to actively maintain the bond between the magical and the mundane through sheer force of heart and memory. As if accepting her vow, the swirling fireflies coalesced one last time. Instead of returning to their freeform dance, they arranged themselves into a single, brief, and perfectly clear shape in the air before her. A graceful, glowing arrow that pointed unmistakably toward the path that led home. The trees thinned until the grove's silver luminescence began to soften, blending seamlessly with the cool, gray light of approaching dawn. Elara paused at the very edge of the forest, one foot on the soft moss, the other on the ordinary, packed earth of the outer path. She drew a final, deep breath of the grove's air, filling her lungs with its fragrance of night-blooming flowers and damp, living earth. It was a threshold more definitive than her cottage door had ever been, a true border between the magical and the mundane. Standing there, she felt her new purpose solidify within her, as tangible as the stone in her hand. She was no longer just a visitor or a guest. She was a keeper, a living bridge between these two worlds. The familiar landscape of her village lay ahead, the simple shapes of cottages and fences looking stark and almost colorless in the flat dawn light. A wave of profound longing washed over her, a desperate urge to turn around and lose herself once more in the silver-lit trees. How could this plain, ordinary world ever compare to the wonder she was leaving behind? This was her final, quiet test, a challenge to her commitment not to the grove, but to her own normal life. With a slow exhalation, she made her choice. She did not cast a single, yearning glance over her shoulder. Instead, she stepped forward, fully and completely, onto the common path. She trusted that the grove's comfort was not a location, but a state of being she now carried within her spirit, a well of calm she could draw from no matter where she was. The ultimate stake of her entire journey now rested on this single, ongoing act. Her ability to manifest that moonlit peace in her daily actions, in every word spoken and every chore performed. As she stepped into the morning light, she felt the stone in her pocket pulse gently, a constant, comforting reminder of the covenant that now traveled with her. The weathered wood of her cottage door felt familiar and strange all at once. Elara slid the iron key into the lock, its cold, metallic click a stark sound after the grove's soft symphony. Stepping inside, the quiet was a physical presence, thick and unmoving. The air smelled of dried chamomile and stillness, a profound contrast to the vibrant, breathing life she had just left. For a moment, the silence felt like a loss, an emptiness that threatened to swallow the echo of the moonlit path. Then her eyes fell upon her small, sun-starved herb garden on the windowsill. The basil was looking particularly weary, its leaves drooping. Without a second thought, she crossed the room and knelt, her fingers reaching out to gently stroke a pale green leaf. As her skin made contact, a subtle warmth seemed to flow from her palm into the plant. Before her eyes, the basil stem straightened, its leaves lifting and deepening to a healthier, richer green. It was a small miracle, a quiet, undeniable proof that the grove's energy had not stayed behind in the forest, but had returned home with her, woven into her very touch. This simple act was her first decision, her first declaration that her ordinary home was now a place for extraordinary care. She unpinned her leather satchel and retrieved the moonstone. Its amber light pulsed softly in the dim cottage, a tiny, captured star. She placed it with deliberate care on the exact spot of the windowsill where the original glowing leaf had first appeared. This was no longer just a ledge for pots and drying herbs. It was an altar, a permanent sacred space that anchored the magic of the Moonlit Groves within her own four walls. The stake of her journey escalated beautifully and terrifyingly in that single gesture. Her entire life, every chore, every interaction, every quiet moment, was now a potential vessel for the grove's calm. Could she truly live with such intention, transforming the mundane into the magical? Just then, the first true ray of morning sun broke over the horizon, striking the moonstone and making its core sparkle with a dazzling, hopeful light. She knew with a calm certainty that her work was just beginning. Her morning began not with the familiar rush of duties, but with a quiet focus. Elara filled her small iron kettle, the sound of water against metal, a soft chime in the stillness. As she set it to heat, she did not turn away to tidy the cottage. She simply watched the flame, her breathing steady and deep, feeling the warmth on her skin as if it were the grove's own gentle light. When she crumbled dried chamomile into her favorite clay cup, she held each fragile flower for a moment, appreciating its delicate form and subtle scent before letting it fall. This was not just making tea, it was a ritual of presence. The hot water bloomed with a golden hue, and as she lifted the cup, the steam carried a fragrance that felt like a quiet blessing. For the first time, a simple chore was not a task to complete, but an experience to savor, a small pocket of sacred calm woven directly into the start of her day. The old habit of moving quickly, of stacking one chore atop another before the sun was fully risen, tugged at the edges of her mind like a persistent whisper. She felt the internal pressure to be efficient, to get on with the real work of the day. This low-level conflict was a new kind of test, quieter than a vine bridge, but just as challenging. It was the grove's final lesson, being lived out in real time. Each time that hurried impulse surfaced, she made a conscious choice. She would take a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, feeling its warmth travel through her. She would look out the window and notice the way the dawn light caught the dew on a spider web. She chose patience, again and again, actively practicing the grove's teachings in a world that did not glow with silver light. The stake was no longer a single, dramatic moment of courage, but the gradual, daily cultivation of a peaceful and curious heart. Could she build a new life, not from grand gestures, but from these countless small decisions for calm? Later that morning, a neighbor arrived at her door, his face creased with worry over a persistent cough that kept his children awake. The old Elara would have quickly mixed a soothing syrup, handed it over with a kind smile, and sent him on his way. But the woman who had returned from the grove did something different. She listened, truly listened to the fatigue in his voice. Her own responses were slower, her words softer and more comforting, as if she were offering him not just medicine, but a share of the quiet she carried. As her hands moved among her jars of herbs, the selection felt less like a memorized recipe and more like an intuitive pull. She reached for honey infused with thyme instead of sage, sensing it would be more soothing for the restless children. Her solutions were not just effective, they were deeply attuned, a quiet magic working through her newfound calm. A frantic knocking broke the afternoon quiet. Elara opened her door to find her neighbor, Tomas, his face etched with panic, clutching his small, feverish daughter, Lena. The child was whimpering, her cries sharp and distressed. The old instinct was to move quickly, to gather herbs and mix a tincture with efficient, practiced hands. But the woman who had returned from the grove felt a different impulse rise within her. She met Thomas' anxious eyes with a calm, steady gaze, and gently ushered them both inside. She prepared a simple feverfew and honey syrup, her movements slow and deliberate, but her main focus was not on the remedy. She guided Tomas to a chair, and then she simply sat on the floor beside little Lena, not speaking, not fussing, just being present. A palpable quiet seemed to emanate from her, a field of serenity that slowly softened the sharp edges of fear in the room. The child's frantic whimpers gradually subsided into tired, even breaths as she fell into a restful sleep, soothed by an atmosphere she could feel but not understand. Tomas, who had arrived a bundle of raw nerves, felt his own shoulders relax, the tight knot in his chest loosening. When he left, he carried not just a small bottle of medicine, but a profound and unfamiliar sense of peace. The urge to explain the source of this newfound calm was a powerful pull for Elara. She wanted to tell him about the moonlit path, the living bridge, the covenant stone. But she understood, with a deep and certain wisdom, that true comfort is felt in the soul, not explained to the mind. To speak of the magic would have diminished it, turning a sacred truth into a mere story. So she made a conscious choice to let her actions, her presence, and the quiet peace she now carried be her only testimony. This was an act of humble service, a decision to let the grove's influence work through her in silence. The stake of her entire journey now rested squarely on this new, quiet purpose, her ability to become a steady, silent source of this profound calm for her entire community was the ultimate test of her guardianship. Could she weave this magic into the fabric of their daily lives without ever naming its source? That evening, as she stepped outside to breathe in the cool night air, she noticed a delicate, silvery leaf plant had sprouted right beside her doorstep, its tiny leaves glowing with a faint, familiar light. The delicate silver leaf plant by her doorstep seemed to pulse with a soft, living light. Elara knelt, her heart beating a little faster as she studied its intricate, unfamiliar shape. This was no common weed or wildflower from the nearby meadows. She had seen this exact species only once before, carpeting the ground around the great willow in the heart of the Moonlit Groves. A piece of that sacred world had taken root in her own soil, a living echo bridging the impossible distance between her cottage and the enchanted forest. The boundary between her two worlds was not just blurring, it was actively, beautifully dissolving right at her feet. A flutter of anxiety tightened her chest. What if she failed it? What if her ordinary garden soil, her simple well water, was not enough to sustain a being of pure moonlight and magic? This was a responsibility far more delicate than brewing a remedy for a cough. To care for this plant was to care for the grove itself, a gentle but immense trust placed directly in her hands. She made a decision, not from a place of fear, but from a deep well of instinct the grove had helped her uncover. She would not treat it as a fragile, foreign object. She would welcome it as a guest. With painstaking care, she used a small trowel to loosen the earth around its roots, lifting the entire cluster and transplanting it to a special, sheltered corner of her garden that caught the first light of the moon. The moment its roots settled into the new soil, the plant seemed to sigh, its leaves perking up and its silvery glow intensifying into a confident, steady radiance. It did not merely survive the move, it thrived instantly and vibrantly. She understood then that the plant's health was a direct reflection of her own spiritual faithfulness. Its vigor was her commitment made visible, its light a barometer for the strength of her connection. That evening, she brought a small cup of water, but as she poured it gently at the base of the stem, she did not just offer hydration. She whispered her thanks, a quiet outpouring of gratitude for the trust, the beauty, and the constant, gentle reminder. As night fell completely, the plant's leaves began to emit the same soft, breathing glow as the moonstone resting on her windowsill. The next full moon rose like a great, luminous pearl in the night sky. Elara carried a simple wooden stool into her garden and sat beside the softly glowing silver plant, the moonstone warm and heavy in her palm. Closing her eyes, she quieted the day's thoughts and deliberately reached out with her feelings, not with a demanding call, but with a gentle, open-hearted thought, a simple greeting sent across the unseen distance. For a breathless moment, there was only the cool night air and the chirping of crickets. Then, the moonstone in her hand flared with a brilliant amber light, so intense it painted her eyelids with gold. A wave of warmth, rich and deeply familiar, washed over her, carrying with it the distinct, wordless impression of a presence she knew as well as her own heartbeat. It was the keeper, and it was answering her, a quiet sob of relief caught in her throat, a hidden, fragile part of her heart, one she had not even dared to acknowledge, had still feared that the entire journey was an elaborate dream, a beautiful fiction conjured by a lonely mind. This moment of undeniable reconnection, this silent conversation of warmth and light, shattered that final, lingering doubt with a gentle, absolute finality. She was not remembering magic, she was living it. In that profound certainty, she made a pivotal decision. This would not be a one-time event. She would seek this communion every full moon, making it the central pillar of her new life, a sacred appointment that would structure her days and give rhythm to her years. This was no longer just about remembering the grove. It was about actively participating in a relationship that transcended the physical world. The lifelong stake was now beautifully clear, the nurturing of this bond so it would grow deeper and more resilient with each passing lunar cycle, a quiet commitment that would define the rest of her days. A soft wind rustled the leaves of the silver plant, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the keeper was pleased. The weaver's hands were never still, but today they trembled as she sat across from Elara. Her name was Anya, and her life was woven from the strong, practical threads of village life. Yet a deep tear had appeared in the fabric of her own family. She had not come for a poultice or a tea. She looked at Elara, her old eyes clouded with a pain no herb could reach, and asked a simple, terrifying question. How do I mend what is broken between my son and me? The request landed in the quiet cottage with the weight of a stone. Elara felt a cold flutter of panic. She was an herbalist, a keeper of plants and quiet moments. Giving counsel on matters of the human heart felt like stepping onto another kind of unsteady bridge, one with no glowing path to guide her. The grove had taught her about calm, but could that calm truly heal a wound so old and personal? She could feel the familiar urge to retreat, to offer a soothing tea, and gently send the weaver on her way. But then she remembered the silent language of the keeper, the way understanding had flowed into her, not as a set of instructions, but as a feeling of deep connection. She made a choice. She would not pretend to have answers. She would offer a perspective. Leaning forward, her voice soft as the moss in the moonlit glade, she began to speak. She did not tell Anya what to do. Instead, she spoke of the willow tree, how its strength lies not in resisting the wind, but in bending with it, its deep roots holding firm while its branches yield. She spoke of the fireflies, how their individual lights create a greater beauty only when they move in a shared, patient dance. She asked the weaver a gentle question. What single, small thread of kindness could you offer without any expectation of it being woven back? The advice was not a solution, but a shift in seeing. It was a seed of patience, a reminder that some mending happens stitch by slow stitch, and that the first one must be taken without anger. Anya listened, her trembling hands gradually growing still in her lap. A new light, one of fragile hope, dawned in her eyes. When she left, her step was lighter, the crushing weight of the problem somehow shared and made bearable. Elara stood alone in her cottage, the silence now feeling different, charged with a new significance. She felt the grove's approval not as a sound, but as a sensation, a soft, resonant chime that vibrated in the air and settled deep within her spirit. Her role was changing, evolving from a simple herbalist into something the village had not seen in a long time, a trusted keeper of a different kind of peace. A few days later, Elara walked a familiar path in the woods near her home, the ordinary sunlight feeling different on her skin after her time in the moonlit world. Her eyes, now trained to see more deeply, caught a flicker of distress. Tucked between the roots of a great oak was a young birch sapling, its slender trunk bruised and its delicate leaves curled inward, brown and brittle. It was a small, desperate struggle for life in the midst of a thriving forest. The sight struck her with a surprising force, a pang of empathy so sharp it felt personal. This was not a task for her herbalist's satchel, but for the deeper wisdom the grove had awakened. She knelt, her fingers gently probing the damaged trunk and the parched earth at its base. The damage was severe, likely from a storm or a careless animal, and for a long, tense hour, her efforts seemed to make no difference. She carefully cleared competing weeds, loosened the hard-packed soil, and brought water from a nearby stream, her movements slow and deliberate. Yet the sapling remained limp, a silent, fading echo. A cold thread of doubt wound through her. Had she misunderstood the grove's lessons? Was this quiet magic only for that other, enchanted place? The conflict was a quiet, internal storm, testing not her knowledge, but her very faith in the connection she had forged. Then, without a conscious thought, a decision rose from a place deeper than doubt. She began to hum, a soft, wordless melody that felt as natural as breathing. It was the same gentle tune she had hummed in the grove to quiet the rustling darkness, a ripple of pure, nurturing love offered not to ward off fear, but to encourage life. As her voice wove through the air, her hands continued their work, but now each touch felt more focused, more attuned. She was not just watering a plant, she was speaking to it in a language of sound and intention, reminding it of its own will to grow. The tension in the air shifted, the suspense breaking as, almost imperceptibly at first, the drooping leaves seemed to lift, their brown edges softening as if drinking in the sound. By the time the evening shadows stretched long, the change was undeniable. The sapling stood a little straighter, a subtle resilience returning to its form. This was more than a successful act of gardening. It was a covenant fulfilled in the common daylight. She had become a healer for the wild itself, her role expanding beyond the human world to embrace every struggling leaf and wounded branch. The next morning, drawn back to the spot by an irresistible pull, she found her answer. There, on a branch that had been nearly broken, a single, perfect white flower had bloomed, its petals holding the morning dew like a promise. Whispers of the glowing garden traveled on the quick, light feet of the village children, and soon a small cluster of them appeared at her fence, their wide eyes fixed on the softly pulsing silver leaves. Elara watched them from her doorway, her heart beating a little faster. The magic was so new, so fragile, and their energy was so boundless. The conflict was immediate, a tightrope walk between the urge to share this wonder and the deep, protective instinct to shield it from careless hands. She made her choice. With a gentle smile, she opened the gate and invited them in, her voice a soft murmur. She did not command them to be quiet, but instead knelt beside the plant and showed them how to extend a single, slow finger, guiding their natural excitement into a state of hushed, reverent curiosity. Their usual boisterous energy melted away, replaced by a mesmerized calm as they took turns gently touching a leaf, their small faces illuminated by its soft, breathing light. She was not just showing them a strange plant, she was offering them a new way to be in the world, where wonder was met with welcome. To protect the magic, she knew she had to frame it in a language they could hold. So she began to tell them a simple story, not of grand adventures, but of a friendly, moonlit forest that loved quiet explorers and rewarded gentle hearts. She spoke of trees that hummed sleepy songs and paths that lit up for those who walked with care, wisely translating her profound experience into a lesson about respect and quiet observation. The stake was immense, a chance to plant the seeds of gentle curiosity and a deep reverence for nature in their young, impressionable hearts, ensuring the grove's comfort would ripple out into a new generation. As her story ended, one of the children, utterly captivated, silently pointed toward the edge of the garden. There, a rabbit sat perfectly still, its nose twitching, its dark eyes reflecting a familiar, soft, silver light. A new quiet had settled over the village, one that Elara felt more than heard. Over the following weeks, she noticed the subtle shifts. A disagreement between neighbors over a straying chicken did not escalate into a shouting match, but was settled with a shared cup of tea and a murmured agreement. People lingered longer in their own small gardens, their hands in the soil, their postures less hurried. The grove's calm, flowing through her quiet actions, and the very presence of the moonlit plants in her garden, was spreading like a gentle, invisible mist, softening the hard edges of daily life. This was the ripple effect she had hoped for, a transformation of the very atmosphere. Yet not everyone welcomed the softening light. For some, the old ways of sharp gossip and swift judgment were a familiar comfort, a shield against vulnerability. A low current of tension hummed just beneath the surface of the new peace, a resistance from those who viewed the growing quiet with suspicion, mistaking patience for weakness and calm for indifference. Faced with this subtle resistance, Elara made a conscious choice. She would not preach, nor would she ever force her ways upon anyone. Her strategy was one of unwavering, gentle example. She met hastiness with deliberate slowness, sharp words with a listening silence, proving through her own serene presence that there was another way to be. The stakes of her quiet work had escalated to a breathtaking scale. It was no longer just about her personal peace, or even the health of a single sapling. The long-term happiness and emotional resilience of the entire community now rested on the fragile foundation of this cultural shift, a grand purpose for her seemingly small deeds. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, a figure appeared at her garden gate. It was the village elder himself, a man who carried the weight of their collective history in the stoop of his shoulders. He had not come for a remedy for any physical ailment. He had come, he said simply, for a conversation. The elder settled onto the wooden bench in her garden, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not speak at first, his gaze sweeping over the silver leaf plant and the other vibrant, healthy herbs that seemed to pulse with a quiet life of their own. Finally, his eyes, old and deeply lined, met hers. "The village feels different," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The air is softer. The children are calmer. We have you to thank for this." His words were not a simple compliment, but a formal declaration. This was the community's leader, a man who valued tradition and visible results, acknowledging a change that had no clear source, yet was undeniably real. The validation was a warm wave, washing over her and settling deep in her bones. Every step of her journey, every moment of fear, and every choice for calm was being affirmed by the very world she had sought to serve. But as the warmth spread, a cold countercurrent of humility rose to meet it. This was not her doing alone. How could she accept praise for a peace that was a gift, a wisdom that had been whispered to her by moonlit trees and a silent keeper? The conflict was sharp and immediate, a struggle between the human desire for recognition and a profound, soul-deep knowledge that she was merely a conduit. She made her decision in the space of a single breath. She met the elder's gaze, her own serene, and offered a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But the true teacher is not me. It is the quiet patience of the soil, the resilience of the willow that bends in the wind, the simple act of listening to what the world has been trying to tell us all along." She gracefully accepted his gratitude while redirecting its focus to the vast, sentient beauty of the natural world, a wisdom available to anyone who chose to be still enough to hear it. In that moment, her role shifted from a quiet herbalist to an acknowledged spiritual pillar of the community, a keeper of a calm that was now seen as essential to their collective well-being. The stakes of her guardianship were no longer personal, but communal. Her ability to embody this peace would now directly influence the moral and emotional health of the entire village. Later that day, she saw the elder standing in his own small plot of land, not barking orders or reviewing accounts, but quietly tending to his rose bushes, his hands moving with a new, thoughtful care. The small group gathered in her garden was a quiet collection of villagers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Elara did not begin with a list of herbs or their uses. Instead, she asked them to find a single plant and sit with it for a long while, observing the shape of its leaves, the texture of its stem, the tiny world of insects that might call it home. This was not the way knowledge was usually shared, and she felt the weight of their confusion. How could she possibly put into words the feeling of a plant's spirit, the intuitive pull that now guided her hands? The challenge was immense, forcing her to translate a deep, wordless knowing into language they could grasp. She found herself speaking of patience as a form of listening, and of curiosity not as a search for answers, but as a way of offering respect. In guiding them, her own understanding of the grove's lessons deepened, the concepts becoming clearer and more solid as she gave them voice. Her core decision was to teach them how to see, not what to see. She prioritized gentle interaction over rigid memorization, showing them that the true medicine often lay in the relationship itself, not just in the harvested root or leaf. The ultimate stake was no longer the peace of the present, but the creation of a living tradition. If she could plant these seeds of mindful respect in their hearts, the grove's calm would ripple outward through their families and their own practices, creating a legacy of environmental harmony that would endure for generations. One afternoon, a young woman named Kayla approached her, her brow furrowed in concentration. In her hand was a careful drawing of a leaf, its edges serrated like a crown of tiny silver teeth, a shape that sent a quiet thrill of recognition straight to Elara's core. Elara's breath caught as she studied the drawing. The leaf was unmistakable, with its crown of tiny silver teeth and the faint, almost imperceptible veining that pulsed with a soft inner light only in the deepest parts of the Moonlit Groves. It was a whisper leaf, a plant she had only ever seen cradled in the roots of the great willow itself. The grove was not just a distant realm visited in dreams or under the full moon. Its very essence was now seeding itself in the ordinary world, its boundaries subtly, silently expanding. A thrill, sharp and sweet, shot through her. This was living proof that the covenant was not a closed circle, but a living, breathing connection that was actively growing. Yet the thrill was instantly chased by a cold, protective fear. What if the plant was found by someone with a careless heart, someone who might crush it for its strange beauty or dismiss it as a weed? The conflict twisted inside her, a complex knot of joy that others might be beginning their own journeys, and a fierce, almost maternal urge to stand guard. She looked from the drawing to Kayla's curious, earnest face, and she made a choice. She would not build a wall around the magic. She would tend the path to it. Her voice was calm and measured as she spoke. "This is a very special plant," she said. "It thrives on quiet observation. I want you to keep a journal. Note exactly where you saw it, the time of day, the quality of the light. Visit that spot with an open heart and simply sit with it. Do not try to pick it or move it. Just listen." She was guiding without controlling, offering a map to wonder instead of a set of rules. The stakes of her guardianship were no longer just about preserving a secret, but about wisely shepherding a revelation. The grove itself was reaching out, making itself more accessible, and the character of every person who found it would now determine its fate. That night, as she prepared for sleep, the moonstone on her windowsill pulsed with a particularly strong, rhythmic light, as if answering the unspoken question hanging in the air. The moonstone's pulse was a steady, insistent rhythm against her palm, a call that could not be ignored. Elara followed its guiding light back into the familiar forest, but the path it illuminated was not the one to the central clearing. It led her instead to a smaller, hidden grove she had never seen, where the keeper waited, its form shimmering like heat haze over sun-warmed stone. It did not speak, but extended a hand of woven light, and a new vision bloomed before her eyes. She saw the roots of the great willow, not as mere wood buried in soil, but as rivers of silver light, diving deep into the earth and spreading outward in an impossible, luminous web. These routes did not end at the forest's edge. They traveled under mountains, across vast plains, and beneath the beds of sleeping rivers, connecting to other pockets of vibrant, quiet magic scattered across the land. She saw a high desert canyon where the stones hummed at dawn, a misty island where the fog itself seemed to breathe with ancient life, a bustling city where a single ancient tree in a forgotten square pulsed with the same resilient energy as her own moonstone. The sheer scale of it was dizzying, a network of sentient places so vast it threatened to dwarf her understanding entirely. Her small cottage, her village, even the beloved Moonlit Groves itself, were just one bright point in a constellation of global calm. The weight of this revelation could have crushed her, transforming her hard-won peace into the anxiety of an impossible responsibility. But as she watched the silent, beautiful map of connection unfold, she made a conscious choice. She would not be intimidated by the vastness. Instead, she felt a profound wonder, a deep and humbling joy. She decided to see herself not as a solitary guardian, but as one vital node in a great, peaceful web, her quiet work resonating along those subterranean threads to strengthen the whole. The personal stake of her journey shattered and reformed into something breathtakingly global. Her daily acts of patience, her nurturing of both plants and people, were no longer just for her community. They were part of a silent, worldwide restoration of balance, a counter-current to the noise and haste that sought to dominate the world. The keeper then placed a hand of pure, warm light upon her shoulder, and for a single, transcendent moment, Elara felt it. She felt the stubborn push of a seed splitting open in dark soil, a continent away, the patient drip of water carving a canyon over millennia, the deep, slow breath of a forest she would never see with her own eyes. She was connected to every growing thing. The keeper's hand, a form of woven light and shadow, gently guided her own down until her fingertips met the cool, rich soil of the hidden grove. The moment her skin touched the earth, a profound shift occurred within her. It was not an eruption of power, but a quiet, deliberate release, like a sluice gate opening in a deep, calm river. A wave of pure, calming energy flowed out from her heart, down her arm and into the ground, a silver current that did not simply vanish into the dirt. She could feel it traveling, racing along the luminous, subterranean web of the grove's roots, a pulse of serene intention that rippled outward across the vast, silent network, connecting every pocket of wild magic in the world. This was the true culmination of her journey, not a final battle against some external darkness, but the ultimate act of acceptance. Elara was not forcing peace upon the world. She was simply being peace, her own calm spirit, a perfectly tuned instrument for the grove's ancient essence to resonate through. The grand purpose she had sought was revealed to be breathtakingly simple. Her only task was to remain open, to live with a heart so steady and receptive that this healing energy could flow unimpeded through her every action, her every quiet word, her very presence in a room. The true magic was not in moving mountains, but in the persistent, gentle pressure of a river smoothing a stone, or the patient unfurling of a leaf toward the sun. It was healing not through dramatic intervention, but through the unwavering commitment to be a conduit for calm, allowing that quiet strength to seep into the lives she touched as naturally as moonlight seeps into a darkened forest. Her legacy would be written not in monuments, but in the softened tone of a difficult conversation, in the patience of a weaver mending a torn tapestry, and in the wide, wondering eyes of a child who learned to listen to the world. The moonstone's steady glow on her windowsill was a constant companion, a familiar friend in the quiet rhythm of her days. Elara moved through her village not as a woman transformed, but as one who had finally come home to her truest self. The path to the Moonlit Groves and the worn footpath to her own cottage door were no longer divergent roads, but two threads in the same beautiful tapestry. Her garden was a living testament to this union, where common sage grew alongside silvery whisperleaf, each plant thriving in a harmony that mirrored the balance she now carried within her spirit. The community around her had learned a new language, not of grand pronouncements, but of quiet listening and patient understanding. Disagreements were met with shared cups of tea and a willingness to see from another's perspective, their resolutions strengthening the bonds between neighbors rather than fraying them. Children who had once chased through the streets with frantic energy now also knew how to sit perfectly still, their small hands gently tracing the veins of a leaf, their curiosity a quiet, respectful wonder. The moonstone pulsed with a light that never wavered, a beacon of the covenant that had rewoven the very fabric of her life. She understood now that the glowing leaf on her sill had not been an invitation to a single magical night. It was a call to a lifetime of gentle guardianship, a daily practice of tending to the calm in her own heart so it could overflow into the world around her. Her story became a quiet testament, a living proof that the most profound adventures are not always about seeking new landscapes, but about seeing the familiar world with new eyes. It asks a simple, powerful question of anyone who hears it. What small, glowing invitation is waiting for you to accept, not as a temporary escape, but as a path to your own enduring peace? you.